Welcome, everyone. Jonathan Kozol has written, "The issues are big, children are small." I'm Chancellor Ann Ponder, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Lipinski Auditorium at the University of North Carolina at Asheville for this program from our Distinguished Speakers Series. Tonight's program is sponsored by the University of North Carolina at Asheville's Department of Cultural and Special Events and is co-sponsored with a coalition of area organizations. We thank them all for their generous support. I also want to thank the faculty and staff of the Teaching Fellows Program, especially Brenda Hopper and Sandra Bird for their leadership in connecting our education students with Mr. Kozol's programs and for bringing him to our campus. Also, in typical UNC Asheville fashion, Bruce Larson, director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, has organized learning circles involving over 60 faculty and staff on campus and an additional off-campus group for discussions of Mr. Kozol's latest book. In that book, The Shame of the Nation, The Restoration of Apartheid in Schooling in America, Jonathan Kozol quotes Thomas Merton, quote, "We owe a definite homage to the reality around us, and we are obliged at certain times to say what things are and to give them their right names." This is what Jonathan Kozol does. He makes it clear that schools in American cities, large and small, even here in Asheville, are segregated, much as they were when I went to school here. Segregation harms not only those in the minority, but also those in the majority, and the effects of segregation extend well beyond K through 12. As Kozol writes, graduation rates for Black and Hispanic students remain frozen or have gone into decline. The enrollment of minority students at a number of the most prestigious public universities has dropped, and he will offer that context this evening here at UNC Asheville. While we struggle to increase the number of diverse students at UNC Asheville, we are aided in our efforts to improve K through 12 schools by having a Teaching Fellows program that graduates teachers with promise, teachers with exemplary skills, teachers with commitment and dedication. Such a teacher is Kim Gentry, also on the stage tonight. Kim came to UNC Asheville from Irwin High here in Asheville, aided by a North Carolina Teaching Fellows Scholarship. Throughout her college career, she excelled, earning numerous awards, including the Carolyn Briggs Award for contributions to diversity and the William and Ida Friday Award. She majored in Spanish, graduating cum laude, while spending many hours serving our campus and tutoring children in area schools. Kim is now a fourth grade teacher at the Ira B. Jones Elementary School in Asheville, and she is here to share how Kozol's writing and work have affected her life and to introduce our distinguished guest to you, Kim Gentry.
Thank you, Chancellor Ponder. As a freshman student at UNC Asheville, my naive ideals and romanticized notions of education were quickly brought to reality as I read through one of Jonathan Kozol's books, Ordinary Resurrections. I knew his purpose was not to discourage me from teaching, but rather to empower those that are compelled to teach. Through the UNC Asheville Teaching Fellows Program, I was able to visit and tutor students attending the after-school program at the St. Anne Church. The children so vividly described in Ordinary Resurrections, and later referred to in Kozol's latest book, The Shame of a Nation. I realized how necessary it was for me to continue my journey into the field of education, to make a difference in the lives of children. I'm given that opportunity every day as a first-year teacher, fourth grade, at Ira B. Jones Elementary in Asheville City Schools. Jonathan Kozol has worked with inner-city children for more than 4 decades and has found that conditions have actually grown worse in the 15 years since federal courts began dismantling Brown versus the Board of Education. A native of Boston and a graduate of Harvard, Kozol has received numerous awards, including the Rhodes Scholarship, 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, 2 fellowships from the Rockefeller Foundation, and fellowships from the Field and Ford Foundations. His first book, Death at an Early Age, described his first year as a teacher and received the 1968 National Book Award. Since then, he has written 12 more books, including Amazing Grace, The Lives of Children, and The Conscience of a Nation, which received the 1996 Anisfield Wolf Book Award, an honor previously granted to the works of Langston Hughes and Martin Luther King Jr. I'm honored to be able to introduce to you this evening educational activist and author Jonathan Kozol.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much, Kim. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you. And I hope we'll have a chance to talk more before I leave Asheville. And thanks also to Chancellor Ponder and a whole lot of really nice people here. Reed Chapman, John Wood, Keith Bramlett, their students, including the wonderful Amber, who went to visit after school with me this afternoon, and superintendents of both the city and the county schools, Robert Logan and Cliff Dodson. And I met so many nice people, I really hesitate. I'm always afraid I'll insult somebody by not mentioning them, but what the heck? You can't avoid it. I really was particularly charmed by getting to know a marvelous, interesting member of the Asheville City School Board named Al Whitesides. You hear Al? Yes. He is so eloquent. I really think he should run for the Senate next time. Just from my curiosity, how many people in this room are real live teachers in the public schools? Wow! Look at that. And how many are thinking that they might become teachers? Good. I always feel safer when I have teachers at my front and back, both. Now, I'm really glad there's so many teachers and teachers to be here. I think some of you know already from my books that I love to be with teachers. I feel very, very close to teachers in the public schools, especially the ones who work with little children in the elementary schools, because those are the grades I used to teach. I just think they do the best thing there is to do in life: bring joy and beauty, mystery, and mischief to the hearts of little pint-sized people. And I love it when I'm visiting a school, and sometimes I'm just hanging there in the hallway before I've figured out what I'm going to do, and a teacher sees me in the corridor and just comes right up to me as though she knows me. It's usually a woman, female, in the elementary schools, and she comes right up and says, "Come on and visit my first grade class." And sometimes she doesn't even give me any choice. She just grabs me by the arm and drags me down the hall, and shoves me in her room. And then when I get there, typically she puts me on the spot and says, "Okay, teach something, because, you write these books. Let's see if you can still do it." And I usually do it wrong because I forget all the little tricks that you learn when you're a teacher. I typically ask the worst possible kind of question, the kind of question you should never ask little people, which gets them all jumping out of their seats at the same time, you know. And now, 7-year-olds, as every first grade teacher knows, have only a theoretical connection with their chairs. They do the most amazing gymnastics. They defy the laws of gravity. And then I make it worse. And you get these little kids in the back row waving their hands at me, standing at the oddest angles to make sure I see them, and making heart-rending sounds, too. And typically there's one right in front of me, like just 18 inches from me, a little girl, a demonic little girl, who's waving her hand right in my face. She's going to poke my eyes out with her fingers, and she's making these terrible sounds. She's like, ooh, 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 I know, ooh, ooh. She's going to die if I don't call on her. And so I call on her, and she looks up at me in complete bewilderment. And she says, "What?" She didn't have a single thing to say. She just wanted me to recognize that she was there. I think that's a humbling experience, and it's a good one for me as a writer to come into a classroom like that and experience the same thing that the teacher experiences. Only I'm there just for a couple hours or a day, whereas she's there doing that work hour after hour, day after day, week after week, year after year, for her entire career. It makes me a lot more cautious in the criticisms that I bring to bear upon our teachers. I sometimes think that every so-called expert from the ivory tower think tanks off in Washington who condemn the teachers in our public schools, and every arrogant politician off in Washington who speaks so patronizingly and condescendingly of teachers in our public schools. I'm not naming anyone in particular. I sometimes think that every one of them ought to be obliged to come into a classroom once a year and teach the class, you know. And not just to read a story for 20 minutes while the TV cameras are watching, but to stay there the entire day and find out what it's like, because it's all too easy to forget. My friends, in terms of elemental class and racial justice in our public schools, we stand today at one of the most perilous and most reactionary moments in our nation's recent history. Segregation of Black and Latino children has returned to public education with a vengeance in the 15 years since the Rehnquist Court began to rip apart the legacy of Brown versus Board of Education. I've just spent 5 years visiting 60 public schools in 11 states. If you were with me and you took a photo of the typical inner-city classroom that I visit, small cities and big cities alike, that photo would be virtually indistinguishable from those faded photos that you see in old textbooks of classrooms in the Mississippi Delta, all black schools from 1925, 1935, or 1940. I virtually never see white children. The proportion of black children now attending deeply segregated schools is at its highest level right now since the death of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. It may come as some comfort to you to know that the most segregated school districts in America are no longer in the South, although segregation is returning to the South very rapidly now. The most segregated state for black kids in America is New York, home of all those former liberals. Second most segregated state is Michigan. Third is Illinois. And fourth is California. In New York and California, 7 out of every 8 black children goes to an almost entirely all-black school. Even within seemingly integrated public schools, internal segregation is increasingly familiar, with overwhelmingly black and Hispanic children in the mainstream classes, especially in high school, while honors and AP classes held in the same building often represent a virtually all-white college prep academy. Now, I won't say this is true of Asheville, but everywhere else. It's beautiful here. I'd like to be invited back. Now, there's a pattern everywhere in the United States. Now, I'm old enough so that I remember Dr. King. I won't say that I knew him. I didn't know him personally. But I stood or sat before him many times when he was speaking. I remember when he came to Boston, I'd inadvertently become a leader in the civil rights struggle in Boston and had been welcomed by the black leadership in Boston during this period, which to me was really probably the greatest honor I've ever felt in my life, because at a time when black folks had no real reason to trust white people, I was embraced by the black community, and I had moved into the black community to live and teach. And when Dr. King came to preach in Boston, the black leadership, the NAACP, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which sponsored his visit, they came to me and they asked me, would I like to walk with Dr. King as he approached the podium where he was going to speak. This was outdoors, a huge rally. And I said, what would I do? And they said, well, you'll be one of his bodyguards. Look at me. They didn't need me. They had plenty of big guys. But I remember how much that meant to me. And I remember watching him close up and being so stirred, not just by his words, but by the tremendous passion with which he spoke. And now I walk into these hyper-segregated schools, New York, Chicago, LA, and I look around me at the faces of the children, some of whom in New York City I've known since they were born, because I've written 3 books about the children of the South Bronx. And I always search into their eyes, and I see them searching into my eyes too, because little children study the eyes of grown-ups all the time. They want to know what we're thinking. And I look at that scenario of poverty, destitution, frequently, and dark skin, not a white child in the room or in the school. And I try to tell myself that this postmodern and millennial apartheid is what Dr. King and all our other martyrs lived and died for. Now, nobody wants me to talk about this anymore. Here in New York, my white friends get so upset when I bring this up. they feel personally offended if I say, well, you're living in the bastion of American apartheid now. And the reason my friends get so upset in New York, my white friends, and I still have white friends too, you know. I don't know why they still like me. And they invite me to their homes for dinner even, like my Harvard classmates, you know. And they get nervous with me, you know, there's no question. They get a little nervous. I can tell, I can see it in their eyes at dinner, because they secretly think I want to redistribute their wealth, you know. Which I do, you know. But they like me nonetheless, and so they're affronted when I bring this up, because all of them, not one of them that I know, will send their child to a school that has mostly black and Latino children in it. They either find one of these, what I call these boutique schools, that is to say a school that's within the public system, but it's a charter school or some kind of unusual school that's somewhat selective, where they can make sure their children will mostly go to school among their own kind. Or else they send their kids to prep schools, to private schools. And so they get real upset when I say this, when I talk about this, because they don't want to feel complicit in a sin. And what they do is they always pull out their credentials from the 1960s, because these are liberals, or actually they're former liberals, you know. They're what I call tired, weary, embarrassed liberals. Neoliberals, they're called. I don't know what a neoliberal exactly looks like, but it always sounds to me like some kind of strange vegetable, like an eggplant, something that doesn't have strong convictions. And what they do is they defend themselves against their present-day behavior by hauling out their credentials from 30 or 40 years before. And they'll say to me, Jonathan, you know me. I'm on your side. I was there. I was in the struggle with you all along. And what they do is they remember all the marches that they went on when they were still young and decent. And, you know, a lot of New Yorkers went on those marches, allegedly to save the soul of the South. And they'll remember every one of them. And they'll say, you know, Jonathan, I was in Washington with Dr. King in 1964. Or I was in Greensboro. You remember that? Greensboro was an important civil rights battle of that era. And then the jewel in the crown of liberal nostalgia. I'm sure you know what's coming from New Yorkers. I was on the bridge at Selma, Alabama. They all say they were there, you know. And I know a black teacher in Harlem who says, if all the former liberals in New York City who claim they were on that bridge really were, it would have collapsed. But I like even more what he said later. He said, you see, Jonathan, to the very poor black and Latino kids I teach today in Harlem, it doesn't matter much what bridge you stood on 40 years ago. They want to know what bridge you stand on now. And these friends of mine can be very rough on me when I say these things in public. And the really tough conservatives and neoconservatives are even tougher on me. And I'm speaking of, you know, some of these very shrewd and rather mean debaters who you see on TV a lot, on Fox television, for example, you know. I don't mean intelligent, compassionate, wise conservatives like the ones in North Carolina. I mean these sociopaths who you see on right-wing TV, and a lot of them come from places like the Heritage Foundation. And they're good debaters, I'll tell you. They're very smart. And they get younger and younger. I don't know where they find them. I sometimes think they must have a farm team somewhere. I think they get them from Dartmouth. And they ship them from Dartmouth to the Heritage Foundation in order to poison the clean air of our good country. And they're wonderful debaters, and they frame their arguments with surgical efficiency. And they use words like sharpened knives and cut right to the bone. And I'm often the target of these debates because, I'm often the only liberal on the TV program. Every TV show needs one liberal, So. And I wasn't really prepared for this. I don't think that's why my daddy sent me to Harvard, to deal with these kinds of really cold-blooded neo-fascist intellectuals. But and they're really brutal, and they'll attack me personally in any way you can imagine. And it hurts, too. I'm not a tough guy, as you can see. But no matter who my anger with my words, and no matter what the price I may be forced to pay, I intend to keep on speaking of this issue to my dying day. And virtually all these deeply segregated schools are savagely unequal to the schools that serve the mainstream of America. I won't focus on North Carolina, especially this part of North Carolina. This western part of the state is a bit unique, though you'd see the same things I'm talking about, certainly if you were in Durham or Raleigh, in that part of the state. But I'll leave North Carolina out of the picture out of courtesy, and just to show you, even a New England Yankee can be courteous. And I'll focus on New York. Just simple example. And don't picture abstractions. Picture a real child. Now, I know that some of you have read my book, Ordinary Resurrections, where I describe a little girl that I particularly came to love in the South Bronx named Pineapple. And some of you, I think, how many of you went up there to the South Bronx to visit? Yes, quite a few. So that some of them may have met Pineapple. She was a bossy little girl who kind of took over my last two books. The time I met her when she was in kindergarten. She was adorable, smart, rather plump, and very, very bossy. Kind of like a pint-sized Oprah Winfrey. And very bossy. When Hillary Rodham Clinton came up to the neighborhood once to visit the kids I'd written about, and reporters, photographers wanted to take a picture of her, Pineapple didn't like where she was standing and told her so, said, yelled at her, she said, Mrs. Clinton, you're standing in the wrong place. She said that to Mrs. Clinton. Mrs. Clinton looked taken aback because not too many people give Hillary Clinton instructions, And Pineapple wasn't at all bashful. She said, over there. And Mrs. Clinton moved. By the time she was in third or fourth grade, Pineapple began counseling me on my lifestyle. And even the way I dressed. Sat me down one day like this with her pudgy little arms right opposite me and, two chairs. And she was upset by the suit I wore. It was an old black suit, which was kind of ratty looking. She said it was raggedy. I like that word kids use, raggedy. That was my favorite suit. Actually, it's this suit right here. After all these years, I still like it. That she looks at it and she fingers the lapel the way parents might do with like a fabric that looks kind of shabby, you know. She fingers it like that. And she says, "Jonathan, is this your only suit?" Because it's the only one she'd ever seen me in. And I said, "Yes, it is, actually." And she says, she's very meditative, you know, but assertive. She says, "Jonathan, I'd like you to look respectable." She said, I want you to go to a good store. Go to a good store and buy yourself a brand new suit. So I did. She was so convincing. I went to an expensive store, to Brooks Brothers, and I bought a new suit. But the problem from her point of view was that it was identical with the suit I had before. You see, it was this. And to understand why her reaction moved me so much, you got to remember where she lived. She lived in a neighborhood which was the poor section of the South Bronx, which is the poorest congressional district in America, right next to one of the richest census tracts in the entire world, the Upper East Side of New York. Abysmal poverty in that neighborhood. Dreary buildings. Her own building was awful. So awful that it embarrassed her when her mother and father invited me to come to visit. She would come down and wouldn't let me use the elevator because it was so depressing and dirty, and would walk me up the stairs. And highest rate of pediatric asthma in the developed world in that neighborhood. High rate of pediatric HIV as well. And despite everything, this little girl loved bright colors. And her mother lovingly wove beautiful bright-colored beads into her cornrows. And she just loved life, this little girl. And she refused to lie down in the darkness that New York had granted to her, and grovel in despair. And she sits me down. You know, here I am in my new suit. It costs a lot, too, which I bought at her demand. And she sits me down for my second counseling session, folds her arms again, looks me right in the eyes. Now, by then she was in 5th grade and more mature, and she says to me, "Jonathan, I know you get upset sometimes to see what we go through, but you don't always need to dress in black." I was so grateful to her for that, and so moved by that kind of role reversal. To have a little girl who has so little counseling me on how to affirm the beauty in life. You know, people sometimes say to me when they read my books, "Gee, it's nice that you grew up in privilege, went to Harvard and everything, and that you like to go and be with those children over there in the Bronx." They say those children, or those kinds of children. And they make it sound as if I were doing these kids a big favor. And, you know, I've never thought of it that way at all. It's never felt that way at all. I've never felt that I collected a big bag of colonial blessings in Harvard Yard and was going to sprinkle them on the foreheads of the children of the poor. I've never felt I went to the South Bronx or any other poor neighborhood, whether in Durham or St. Louis or L.A., to sprinkle blessings on the children of the poor. I went in search of blessings. and in the wonderful, compassionate, unexpected, soulful, spiritual resilience of so many of these little ones like Pineapple, and in their sheer sense of humor and charm, I find those blessings every single time. So take little Pineapple instead of thinking of a number, and let's consider how America regards her in comparison to children of the rich. New York, a couple of years ago when Pineapple was in 5th grade, was able to spend about $11,000 on a year of her education. That was the per pupil spending, the public schools of the South Bronx, $11,000. That may sound high to you, but considering the cost of living in New York, that's like about $5,000 anywhere else. You lift up Pineapple in your grown-up arms, your decent arms, your compassionate arms, your ethical, courageous, Judeo-Christian arms. You lift her up out of her $11,000 segregated public school and plunk her down just 7 minutes away by car in the first white suburb to the north of New York City. She'd be getting $19,000 put into her public education every single year. Lift her up again, and you plunk her down in one of those truly beautiful suburbs out on Long Island. If you know New York, like Manhasset, where my Harvard classmates live, she'd be getting $22,000 put into her public education every year. So we say in church or synagogue, I happen to be Jewish, or in all kinds of houses of prayer, because all religions say this, we say that all our children are of equal value in the eyes of God. And in the eyes of God, my friends, I'm sure they are. But not in the eyes of America. In the eyes of America, because of the unjust, undemocratic, and archaic way we finance public education, these little children that I write about, like similar children in every inner city district of this nation and millions of poor kids in the rural districts too, come into our public schools with a price tag printed on their foreheads. These are America's cheap children. These are the Kmart babies. You want to see a Neiman Marcus baby, a Lord and Taylor baby, a Saks Fifth Avenue baby, you have to go out to the affluent white districts. Now, I have friends, rich friends, who ask me whether you can really buy your way to better education. Poor people never ask that question. But who asks that question? It's the ones who live in the $22,000 district. They're the ones who ask that. And I have friends who live in those affluent districts where they are so ambitious for their kids, even though they have spectacular high school classes with 15 electives, 5 foreign languages, not just Spanish and French, but Mandarin Chinese and Japanese and Russian, and that they may have 14, 15 AP classes. Then they're still not happy with their schools. And these friends of mine, when their kids are in 9th grade, send them off to very expensive New England prep schools. These are the same friends, who invite me to dinner at their homes. And so I know what they do, and I know what those prep schools cost. And the reason I know these things is because these friends of mine tell me. They don't think I'll tell you, you know. Besides, they don't really need to tell me because I grew up in privilege. I know that world. I grew up in New England. Pineapple once said to me, Jonathan, what's it like over there? Is that vivid for a child to say? He said, what's it like over there? Well, I know what it's like over there because I grew up over there. And I know what Andover costs, for example. Andover and Exeter, two of the top prep schools in New England. I lived just 15 minutes from Andover. And when I was a teenager, I went to a similar school. Andover now and Exeter both now cost $40,000 a year with all the extras. And I have friends who send 2 children off to those schools simultaneously. Members of the Congress, people in the Senate, and so forth. Business leaders, doctors, surgeons. I have 2 kids at Andover at the same time, so they're spending $80,000 a year to guarantee their children the royal road, not just to a first-rate university like the University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, or University of California in Berkeley, but more specifically to Harvard or Brown or Cornell or Columbia, or if they're so unfortunate, Yale. And so they're spending $80,000 a year, and I'm sitting there at their home for dinner. And we finished the dinner, you know, and coffee's being served. And it's time for the creme brulee. And this peculiar cerebral defect clicks off in their brain, a bizarre failure of logic. It seems a peculiar illness of the Ivy League. They're spending $80,000 a year for their own child. This man looks me in the eyes and says, can you really buy your way to better education for poor children? And I'm a polite person, but sometimes if I've had a glass of wine or 2 or 3, I'll look him right in the eyes and I'll say, I don't know. It seems to do the trick for your kids, doesn't it? And I don't know why they still invite me back to dinner, you know. What does money pay for? Well, one thing it pays for is a dignified surrounding for your education, a pleasant place to go to school. And I write about this a lot in all my books because to me, one of the worst sins of an affluent society in a nation that's physically so beautiful is that we put so many of our poorest children into buildings that are squalid, or if not squalid, are bleak and so uninviting. You know, no corporate CEO would be willing to work within these buildings for 2 hours. Yet we ask our poorest kids to spend their entire childhood within these buildings. The lunchrooms are notably the most squalid parts of these poorly funded schools, as I'm sure you don't have anything like this here in Asheville. I just had dinner with your superintendent, and I like him very much. So I want to be polite. Besides, maybe this is the great exception to the rest of America. But certainly this is the pattern everywhere that I go within the urban areas. Pineapple used to describe the lunchroom at her school, in elementary school. She used to call it lunchroom hell. And she made me go and eat with her there once, and I thought that was a good description of it. The high schools are even worse. I go to some of these high schools, and I see, well, there's one high school in the North Bronx that I'll never forget, because just going down to the lunchroom destroys your appetite. The lunchroom is way down this basement cafeteria. There are 3,400 children in a building that's legally suited for 1,800. So they have to have 7 separate lunch shifts. Have you ever been in a school like that? 7 different shifts for lunch. Guess when the first one is? 9:30. So kids who have lunch at 9:30 aren't hungry, but they get ravenous by noon. What do? They slip out of the school building to get food somewhere else, and usually they don't come back. The group I was with, who were sort of, kids always take me under their wing. A group of 9th and 10th graders told the principal they were going to take me down to lunch. They were on the noon shift, fortunately. But even then, it was so crowded down there, they only had 30 minutes for lunch, and it took 20 minutes to get through the line. And so the kids get unruly during that long waiting period. And as I say, it's really ugly down there. And the kids start arguing. And a fight broke out while we were waiting in line, so it degrades everybody. It degrades the children. The kids get wild. If a stranger walked in, you know what strangers often say when they walk into a situation like that? They say, these children act like animals. Well, if you treat them like animals, they'll act like animals. So the children lose their dignity. But the grown-ups do too, because even the lunch monitors and the teachers who are trying to control the chaos in the room have to become kind of mean themselves in order to keep the lid on everything. So perfectly nice grown-ups lose their own dignity, and they have to sound as mean as Patrick Buchanan, and they lose their self-respect. Frankly, they become tough cops, and they try to outshout the kids, and it gets worse. In this case, even the man who ran the whole lunchroom lost his self-control and became a kind of monster. The little kids, it was a little 9th grade girl. She looked like a 5th grader who decided to kind of take care of me during lunch. And she asked me, what would you like for lunch? And I was kind of weak because I have low blood sugar in the middle of the day. And I said, I would love chocolate milk if they have it. And she said, I'll look and see. And she got out of line and peeked ahead and came back and said, they have it today. I'll get you some chocolate milk. I like these kids take good care of me, you know. I find the inner city kids, the poorest kids are often more thoughtful to me than when I visit wealthy suburban schools. The suburban kids tend to be a little bit more glib and cocky, but these inner city children, maybe because they know pain and vulnerability, seem very sensitive to strangers who might not be feeling well, and they're always respectful to older people. So we get up to the front of the line, and she picks out chocolate milk for me, 2 of them, and sandwiches and other nice things. But the man behind the counter is himself so deranged by the chaos in the room that he grabs my tray away from me. He took my tray away. And he pointed to me, and he said, you can't eat. You, pointing to me. And I said, why not? I'm hungry. And he said, this is what he said. He said, no ID. So the little student says, of course he doesn't have ID. He's not a student here. He's a grown-up. Man says, no ID, no food. And he gets more adamant the more she challenges him. You see, utter irrationality has settled in. And a teacher's watching this, African-American teacher's nearby, feels embarrassed. And she says, he's our guest. He's the chancellor's guest. Chancellor's the superintendent of the New York City schools. I wasn't just the principal's guest and the chancellor's guest. Man says, no ID, no food. It's funny. And he got red in the face, and she grabbed the tray away from him. And he grabbed it back. And they were wrestling over my little tray, my chocolate milk. And this little student, God bless her, while he was distracted, she just grabbed 2 more chocolate milks, slipped in my pocket. Bless her for her larceny. But the reason I tell you this is that, you see, I know what it's like on the other side. Remember, Pineapple said, what's it like over there? I know what it's like over there. And I keep going back to visit over there so I won't forget. And I don't mean just the richest schools that serve the wealthiest children, just regular good American schools that serve the mainstream of white America. Up in New Hampshire, for example, I visited an ordinary, nice high school, not super rich, just white kids, you know. New Hampshire is very white. And it's nice in the lunchroom, and it's not down in some filthy dungeon. They have nice little tables that are shaped like hexagons with little tiled surfaces and little designs in the tiles. And, you know, so 4 or 5 kids can sit together and have a nice relaxed conversation, and the teacher strolls in, and he doesn't have to be a tyrant. He can just sit down at the table with them, and he chats with them. What'd you do on the weekend? How are you doing on your lessons? And in nice weather, they open up a whole wall, and the kids can sit outside on a terrace, on a patio. And they even had a salad bar there, a real salad bar, you know? They don't have that in ghetto schools, with nice, crisp, raw carrots and big black olives and bacon bits, just like in a hotel. And not just lettuce, but upper class lettuce. Arugula, that's it. See, when I was growing up, that hadn't been invented yet. They just had lettuce. And let me tell you, nobody walking into that lunchroom would have said, these children act like animals. Here's why I told you that story at such great length. Because I believe aesthetics count. Beautiful surroundings refine the souls of children. Squalid settings coarsen their mentalities. It's one of the sharpest ways in which we draw the lines of class and caste in this American society. And then I went out to Los Angeles just to see, maybe it's different there, walk into one of the largest high schools I've ever seen in the world, Fremont High in South Central LA, 5,000 kids. I didn't see more than 3 white kids the whole time I was there. And one of them had green hair, so he doesn't count. Maybe that's what they mean by other. You know, they say other. And there's so many kids that 1/3 of the students at Fremont High had no classrooms. They're in trailers. Trailers. Ugly trailers, too. Not pretty modern trailers. But they don't even call them trailers. They have them in New York now, too, because it's much cheaper than building schools for children. Just buy a trailer. Or an old, buy a used trailer, I guess. You don't have enough money for a new one. No school system in America has the courage to call them trailers. You know what they call them? Portables. Portables. In California, they don't even call them portables. In California, guess what they call them? Bungalows. Bungalows, but they don't look like bungalows. Bungalows are cute. They have thatched roofs. That's like where Christopher Robin and Piglet and Eeyore had a tea party. These are ugly places for our outcast children. And I walk into a class, a wonderful young teacher, 28-year-old, but she's been teaching for about 6 years already, 10th grade history. She has 40 children in that class. One thing to read about that in textbooks or news stories. It's another thing to walk into a class like that. I said, how many classes do you have each day? She said, I have 6 classes, including homeroom. How many in each class? She said, my smallest class is 36. My largest is about 44. I said to her, right in front of the children, I said this. I shouldn't have said this, but I said, how the hell? You shouldn't swear, but I guess they've heard worse in South Central. I said, how the hell do you teach 40 kids? And don't ever ask a question like that, because she looks at me and she says, here, find out. And she handed me the class. And I worked with them for a full hour, and they were very responsive. They knew I was a writer, and they really poured their hearts out to me. And in fact, it was the last period of the day, and many of them asked if I would stay an extra hour so we could talk for 2 full hours in all, which we did. And I found them incredibly moving, stirring, beautiful kids. And I've told some of the most poignant stories they told me in my new book, In the Shame of the Nation. But the thing is, with the exception of 1 or 2, none of them could write down these. They couldn't write down what they were telling me in words that made any sense. They'd all been, almost all of them had been right through the California school system, Latino and black alike. Those who were immigrants were the children of immigrants, really. They were all products of the United States public schools. They'd had this heavy drill and kill curriculum in elementary school in California, where I'm going to speak about that a little more, test-driven instruction. But they hadn't, they'd learned how to sound out their phonics, but they didn't know what the words meant. And they couldn't construct sentences of their own. I was later given a big, thick pile of letters they'd written to me. And I read them on the plane, and my heart just sank because they were at the level of a 3rd grader. And I thought of all the eloquence within that room, and it was like seeing spirit locked in stone. And I thought later, what a loss, not just to these children, but to our nation. All this beauty that will never be seen, all the poems that will never be written, all the songs that will never be sung. It seemed, if we were a 3rd world nation, if this were Haiti, this would be understandable. You might say, well, we've only got so much, so we'll give what little we have to a small hereditary elite, to a hereditary meritocracy, and we'll hope that they can carry the ball. But we're not Haiti. We're not a 3rd world nation. We're the richest nation in the world. We can afford to give beautiful schools with hexagonal tables and arugula and bacon bits and relaxed and comfortable teachers to every child in this land. You see, that's the thing. Now, I know people in Washington who say to me, class size just doesn't count. Try telling that to either the superintendents I met at dinner today. I'm sure they'd have something to say on that subject. Try telling that to any principal. And try telling that to the teacher who had 40 kids in her class in Los Angeles. But, the way they word it is this. They say, well, a teacher who's any good can do a pretty good job even with 40. That's true. If you can hire enough real wizards and magicians for your school, people who can perform as if they were stand-up artists, enough Chris Rocks, enough brilliant performers, maybe they could do a pretty good job with 40 kids. But the teacher who can do a pretty good job with 40 kids can work miracles with 20 kids because she's got twice as much time for every one of them. And yet, they throw that at me all the time. Once Patrick Buchanan, with whom I had to debate on television, made fun of me, and he said, this small class size stuff is nonsense. He said, I went to a school, and it was an old school. We didn't have a modern building. We didn't have beautiful textbooks. We didn't have any of this innovative stuff you talk about, because he thought I was just, a liberal sap, Harvard dweeb. And he said, we didn't have computers. Of course, they didn't have computers when he was a child. And he said, and we had more than 40 in the class, and we had 50 in the class, and if you misbehaved, the nuns whipped you. And then he sat back, and he smiled and said, didn't do me any harm. Listen, at Andover and Exeter, I know those schools very well. You know what typical class sizes are like? About 12 or 15 in a class. And not everybody who goes to those fancy New England schools is brilliant either. I can tell you, I went to a school like that, as I said before, and there were plenty of dumb boys in my class, but they had very aristocratic names. I had a boy in my class whose name was Abbott Cabot. Like last name, it's like first name. It's like a corporate merger right in his name. And some of those boys were dumb. Most of the girls who go to those schools are pretty smart, but a lot of dumb boys there. On a completely unrelated subject, totally unrelated, did you know that President Bush went to Andover? I'm being polite, and by an odd coincidence, so did his father. That's the most amazing coincidence. Just by sheer chance, so did his brother, Jeb. And here's what I believe. If small class size and the individual attention that enables a good teacher to give to every child in his or her class every single day of the year is good for the son of the President of the United States or a U.S. Senator or a big-time CEO, then it's good for the poorest child of the poorest black, Latino, or white mother in New York, Chicago, or Atlanta. Apart from the quality of the teacher, I'm going to speak of that in a moment, there's nothing, in my mind, more important than the size of classes in a public school. I need to use the remaining time to say a few brief words about No Child Left Behind. The testing law, which is causing so much unhappiness within the land. The main problem with this law is that the tests that it mandates, starting in third grade and every year thereafter, are useless to our teachers. Except, when the law was presented to the Congress by the White House argued, I don't know if the president said this or his Secretary of Education, Rod Page. Do any of you remember Rod Page? In all politeness, I am sure he was appointed by the president so that when they spoke, neither would embarrass the other with his syntax. But I just would listen to Rod Page. I met him once, and I just could never find the verb that went with the noun. But one of them said this. They said, all we want to do by these high-stakes tests is to help Miss O'Brien. I don't mean to use stereotypes. I'm just making up a name. Help Miss O'Brien see where little Shaniqua's weaknesses might lie, so she can help little Shaniqua improve and strengthen herself in those areas of need. Now, I don't know what planet they live on in Washington. If they knew anything about most public school systems in America, they would know that high-stakes tests in most of our cities are given in January, February to March, and the results don't come back to the teacher until June. And if McGraw-Hill corrected them, they're often wrong also. They make a lot of mistakes. They've made notorious errors. But I've been with many principals in July when they see the test scores for the first time. I mentioned this in Georgia 2 days ago, and teachers said, we just got back last spring's test scores now. So what is Miss O'Brien going to do? Should she send a postcard to Susie? Say, dear Susie, last March, you were weak in consonant blends. What good that could do. The second problem with these tests is that they are not diagnostic. They don't tell you anything specific about the child's needs. All they do is give you a retroactive stamp of either failure or success. My own personal belief is that NCLB and the testing aspect of it in particular was never intended to improve the quality of education in our public schools. I think it was intended as a shaming ritual by which to hold our already underfunded schools to tougher standards, to higher standards, unrealistically higher standards, refuse to provide the extra funds that might enable them to meet those standards, and in this way humiliate the public school as an institution, as a legacy in our society, and pave the way for private vouchers. That's my own belief. One of the saddest parts of all is to see little kids in third grade being given these high-stakes tests when you know in advance how many of these kids have had no preschool, okay? Now, the reason I say that is the following, that almost every state claims, especially after there's a court suit, every time there's a threat in court from children's advocates who say all our kids deserve pre-K, the state legislatures usually claim they're starting some rudimentary pre-K program, and many states promise it will be universal within a few years. It never is. Don't believe it. I hate to, I don't want to say anybody's a liar, but they don't tell the truth, and New York says it has a universal pre-K, but when I did a little research, I found 75% of the eligible children couldn't get into it. So it's, a slight adaptation on the dictionary definition of universal. Means 1/4 of those who need it in that case. You know how you find out how many kids in a community get pre-K? Don't look at the numbers they present to you. You go into the kindergarten class, pull up a little, those little teeny weeny chairs? Squeeze into it. Squeeze into that little chair and look right into the eyes of one of those teeny weeny little people. And ask that little girl, little boy, what did you do last year and the year before? And if the little child is too shy to tell you, ask the teacher. Kindergarten teachers always know. It doesn't take them long either to figure out. They know who got real pre-K and who didn't. And when I go to the poorest neighborhoods around America, time after time, the teachers will say to me, well, Jonathan, if you mean real pre-K, if you mean rich, real developmental pre-K of the kind that upper middle class people buy for their kids, and now she'll look around the room and she'll say, maybe out of these 24, 22, 26 kids, maybe 5 or 6 of them got something for 1 year. And meanwhile, I ask the children in a privileged community, or I ask the teachers, how many got pre-K? And typically the teachers will say right off the bat, they'll look around the room and they'll say, all but 1 or 2 of them have had pre-K since they were 2 years old. And I mean beautiful pre-K. Also, those rich communities, those kids have wonderful Montessori programs, lovely, lovely pre-K programs. And they're not rote and drill academies for little 2-year-olds. They're not crazy, They're not sociopaths like the people at these places like Heritage Foundation just want to drill kids to death. They don't have 2-year-olds, chanting consonant blends. But they might sit on a nice rug, a nice soft fuzzy rug that has letters and things on it. It's called a reading rug. Have you ever sat on one? And they might have, you might sit on a consonant blend. You might learn a little that way, sort of might come up through your little bottom. Phonetic osmosis. And then all these kids, the ones I'm writing about, who have been sitting at home watching TV since they were 2, well, their mothers, by the way, were not ignoring them, but their mothers were being forced to work 2 jobs typically to get even a minimum of welfare. Their mothers aren't home. They're with grandma usually, or an older sibling. Well, they've been home all those years, and the children of the privileged have been in these beautiful pre-Ks. Now they enter public school, and a couple of years later in 3rd grade, they receive high-stakes tests. And guess which ones suddenly are identified as gifted and talented and are set on the first stage of that road that leads to honors classes and AP. And guess which ones are found developmentally delayed and set up for repeating 3rd grade. And as all of you know probably, every time a child repeats a grade once, it reduces by 50% the chance that that child will ever graduate. You repeat twice, reduces that chance by 90%. I want to say to you, I think it's especially, whatever you think of testing in general, I think it's especially outrageous to impose so many high-stakes tests in the early grades of school if we had first denied these children any opportunity for preschool. It's just unthinkable. There's something There's something, there's something, there's something deeply hypocritical about a society that will hold a little girl like Pineapple, 7 or 8 years old, accountable. If you go into the teaching profession, you'll find that's the buzzword now. That will hold a little 7 or 8-year-old girl accountable for her performance on a standardized exam, but does not hold the Congress and the president accountable for robbing her of what they gave their own kids 7 years before. And I've been invited to meet with the Democratic members of the House of Representatives. In December, I didn't realize when I accepted the invitation there would be quite so many of them. I'm going to make this point to them as strongly as I can, because I don't like it when they love to pat me over the shoulder and say, Jonathan, you're a good guy, you're a dedicated guy, your books are moving and so forth, but then fine, when it comes down to a vote, they forget these priorities. I always say I have to be tougher on my friends than my adversaries. Don't forget that now, those of you who are Democrats. I don't have to be tough with the Republican Attorney General, because he doesn't care what I think. He's never heard of me. I don't have to be tough with the president. He doesn't read my books. I'm sure. The ones who do read my books, those are the ones I'm tough with. Okay, I'm not going to say much more, because there's a lot more I'd like to say, but I'd like to get to know some of you well. So I'm going to end just by making two final points. One is, in a lot of these heavily test-driven schools that I see, principals and teachers now live in a state of terror, where in permanent anxiety, where the only thing they can think about is the test scores, the numbers. And as a result, they're actually diverting not only time, but scarce resources from genuine instruction to teaching ritual, to testing rituals, or rather rituals that train the kids for the tests. So, I'll come into a class and I'll see on the board, like the teacher has to write on the board an outcome for every single lesson. Now I'm thinking of a man. I'll use a man as an example. In a typical inner city school, he's required to write on the board. Now, you can't just come in any day of the week and do something spontaneous. He can't come in and say, you can't write on the board, outcome of lesson for today. I read my favorite poem of whoever. I'll give a male European white example just because that's what I am. Of William Butler Yeats. And so I read a poem of William Butler Yeats, and my third graders loved it. Now, you can't do that anymore. You can do that in the rich suburbs, not in these test-driven schools. Instead, you have to find a number for what you're doing, like a numbered state proficiency. You have to write something like outcome, ELA, that means English Language Arts, or whatever term you use in North Carolina. 65B, I used a poem of William Butler Yeats to deliver the following state proficiency. And then you have to name it in the words of the standards. And this is proof that you're getting the kids ready for what's going to be on their exam. Do any of you have to do this in your schools? Yes. Do you have to put the numbers up? You do. Well, some do and some don't, apparently. So I came into one class. I mean, this is an example of what's happening. And it upsets me so much because really good teachers are going to quit if they have to keep doing this. And they're going to flee these urban test-driven districts, and they're going to, you know where they'll end up? They'll end up in the nice white suburban schools where they can still be human beings in the classroom and where they don't have to teach to the test because there isn't this desperation atmosphere. I walked into a classroom in the South Bronx, though this could have been in many classes I visited in St. Louis, Chicago, or elsewhere, or in the South for that matter. And on the board it said, English Language Arts 67B, outcome. See, a lot of you are looking bewildered. This is what you have to do in these schools nowadays. Outcome or objective. Which word do you have to use here? Objective, okay. One more syllable for North Carolina. Objective. And here's what it said. It said, children will demonstrate their competency. It's a terrible word, by the way. They always think if you add an extra syllable, it means something more. You know, it really doesn't. It's just like, you know, how you can't say you can't say you're going to use a poem. In these test-driven schools, they want you to say utilize. Utilize. And they don't like words like copy. Just that's a normal word. Replicate. You know. You can't just start something. You have to initiate it. You can't do it. You have to implement it. You know, it's a kind of, this is what the standards writers want. I can tell you most state standards are not written by great intellectuals because great poets and mathematicians and philosophers would not waste a year of their life attaching numbers to little tiny fragmentized subunits of cognition. So insecure people use extra syllables. That's the truth. When I was a student at Harvard, I was blessed to study literature, to study writing with a great poet of that era, a man named Archibald MacLeish. And MacLeish once said to me, Jonathan, when you find yourself piling on Latinate extra syllables for simple words that can be, you know, stated in ways that ordinary mortals understand, be suspicious of your motives, you know. Anyway, I always say that to teachers. Don't start utilizing things that you replicate, you know. Just speak in your own language. Speak in your own authentic voice, your real voice, you know. But anyway, this said, children will demonstrate their competency in production of a narrative procedure. I said, what does that mean? Because I didn't know, I had no idea what it meant. He said, all it means is write a story. So I said, well, why can't you just say write a story? He said, no, they want you to state it in those terms because those terms will appear on the state exam. And they want to make sure that children will recognize that language. I said, well, why do they need to know words like production of a narrative procedure? Because they'd never use those words in real life. I mean, what if you walked out in the street and people said, hey, man, what have you been doing lately? Producing a narrative procedure, you know. In fact, I asked him, I said, I don't even think you can do that. I don't think you can produce a procedure. I don't think the two words go together. And he said they don't. It's rotten syntax, but that's what the standards demand because that's what's aligned with the exams. And the final example I'll give is that a lot of these schools have become so number crazy, they want to measure the children constantly. You see that everything has to be measured. That it's almost, you know, up in New Hampshire, they have this nice old expression, the lamb farmers, up in Vermont to be more accurate. It goes like this: you don't fatten your lambs by weighing them. You know? But all this is about weighing instead of fattening. So there's almost this illusion coming from Washington that if we keep, we won't give them any more resources, don't even dream of greater equality, don't even touch the forbidden subject of apartheid, don't give wonderful, beautiful young teachers the kind of pay they deserve so they'll have an incentive to stay there in the classroom for a lifetime. But number everything. So you've got the superintendents under your thumb, and so they'll feel scared enough to keep their principals under the thumb, and the principals will keep the teachers under their thumb, and everybody will be, numbering and counting how these kids are doing all the time. Here's the ultimate example. In one school in a major city, a teacher read this to me first, and I didn't believe it. They figured out a way to number the way, to grade by numbers the ways that children filed in the stairways of the school. And then they required it for everybody in the system. They replicated it, see? Everybody in the system. And somebody did a lot of work on this. They broke down the filing proficiencies of children into 32 separate slots. This is part of the idea that if they learn to march properly through the hallways, they'll also march obediently through their lessons. They won't ask questions. Let the kids in the suburbs ask the questions. Let the kids in the ghetto neighborhoods be trained to give predicted answers. Let one class interrogate reality. Let the other genuflect before it. So this extends to filing. Here it is, a triumph of empirical school management. Level 4. Did you know that's the best? Level 4. These are the best filing characteristics. Line leader confidently leads line. Line is straight. Each of these has its own number, but this is all level 4, okay? Line leader confidently leads line. Line is straight. Spacing is tight. The class is stepping together. Everyone shows pride. Their shoulders high. No slumping. All right, next one down, level 3, not quite as good. Line leader leads class, but not with confidence this time. Line is straight, but 2 or 3 people not quite in line. Not everybody shows pride. It's interesting. They have to discriminate, you see. Imagine staying up late at night in the state capitol trying to figure this out. Level 2, now we're getting down to the lower depths. Several are slumping. Little pride is showing. Spacing is uneven. Some are talking and whispering. Now we get to the bottom, level 1. Line leader is paying no attention at all. Heads are turning every which way. Hands are touching. The line is not straight. There is no pride. Oh. All right. There's been a tough talk in certain ways, so let me end it on a personal note. I'm in an age when time increasingly feels precious to me. An awful lot of people in the education world upon whom I've relied for courage and for guidance have been taken from us in the past few years. I think especially of my dearest friend in education, man who was perhaps the best friend little children in America have had in the past half century, who asked me if he could come up to the Bronx to meet the kids I wrote about. Man with whom I'll bet almost everybody here would love to have spent a day of your life if it were still possible. Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers. Fred was in New York once, and he asked me, we'd already met, and we'd talked a lot, and he was in New York once, and he said, I'd kind of like to meet the children you wrote about in the Bronx. Could I go up there with you? And I said, sure you could. And he was so modest. He said, do you think I'd intimidate them? I thought that was, I thought that was such a sweet thought that Mr. Rogers could intimidate anybody. And I said, I bet they can handle it. I teased him. And so he said, okay, let's go. How do you usually go, he asked me. And I said, well, I usually go on the subway. Because there's no trolley in New York. So I said, subway. He said, okay, let's go on the train. And we went on the subway, number 6 train, to Brook Avenue. And I have to admit, I was excited myself. I felt like a little kid sitting on the train. I kept thinking, wow, I'm on the New York subway with Mr. Rogers, And we come up to the Bronx, and tough neighborhood at that time. It still is, this particular neighborhood, Brook Avenue. That time was particularly tough. It was the heart of the crack cocaine trade then. And there we are walking up the block together, And I kept thinking, hope nobody hurts him, or maybe just no one will know who he is. Maybe they won't remember him. Or maybe we're so divided racially that he'll seem like a stranger here. Baloney. We go half a block, and a sanitation truck comes screeching to a halt. Driver, who is a middle-aged, maybe 50-year-old black man, jumps right out of the truck and lifts Mr. Rogers off the ground. And we go up to a public school, and I always do that to try to pay respect to the teachers who are still there, fighting the good fight in the front lines of the public schools, not the boutique schools, not the little cutesy schools that get private subsidies, but the regular public school teachers, in the mainstream of America. They get so little respect these days, and it meant so much to them to have Mr. Rogers visit, And he didn't ask them any mean questions. He didn't walk in and say, what's your AYP? He just listened to them a lot. And some of those older teachers cried to have him in their classroom. And then we went to this wonderful after school right near the public school. And it was packed. There were about 90 children there. And this little boy, Mario, who was 6 at the time, a dear little boy whom I was very fond of. It's one of these kids who's, I don't know, like a little 6-year-old, if he doesn't like you, he can make that very, very clear. But if he likes you, you're in for it. He goes right at Mr. Rogers, like straight across that room, like a little jet-powered bumblebee with his wings spread wide. At the moment of collision, he wraps them around Mr. Rogers' head, kisses him right in the middle of the forehead, looks him in the eyes, and says, welcome to my neighborhood, Mr. Rogers. And Fred never forgot that, and later sent me photos of Mario and kept writing to me, and we went back to the Bronx again, and he remained a beautiful friend who gave me moral strength right up to nearly the time of his death, which was just a couple of years ago. The fall that I didn't know he was dying. That fall, I had a dog that I loved, and the children in the Bronx really liked this little dog. The golden retriever. Her name was Sweetie Pie, and Fred came to love Sweetie Pie, and he started sending her faxes because Sweetie Pie and I didn't do email. He started sending her faxes, and he would call her every so often, especially on her birthday. Every year he must have kept a careful calendar, and he would want to talk to her on her birthday. And I'd lift up her fuzzy ear, and he'd talk to her, and sometimes she'd give him a woof in reply. If we were out, he'd leave a voicemail for her. And that year, finally, in the fall, she became very ill with cancer. And it was in her nose. And it was a rapidly spreading malignancy, and it entered her optic nerve, and it began to penetrate the bone that protects the brain. And I told Fred that she was in chemotherapy, and he kept calling and writing about her. And finally, in November, when I could see that it was hopeless, for some reason I was afraid to tell Fred. I didn't want to upset him, so I didn't write to him for a month. And in December, I got a little fax from him, and he said, "Dear Jonathan, I hope your silence doesn't mean the worst. My love to Sweetie Pie." And he never told me that at the very same moment he had been diagnosed with a malignancy that was inoperable. And the next time I heard of him, that was the last letter I got from him. 6 weeks later, he had died. So I miss him tremendously. He gave me so much strength. The other person who was really my lifetime ally in my work, my oldest friend and my strongest source of moral courage all these years, used to read me Isaiah when I was a little boy. A little surprised, it was my mom. She lived to be 102 years old and died 10 days ago, just short of her 103rd birthday. I wasn't sure I could make this trip because it was so hard to go through it. She was a wonderfully strong, morally high-minded person. She also was a fanatic baseball fan. Naturally, we lived in Boston, right? I still live there. He loved the Boston Red Sox. Hated the New York Yankees, And, sometimes when I was with her, I would look in her eyes and I would think, my God, my mom has lived a whole century. She was a little girl, about 3 years old, before anybody had even heard of Woodrow Wilson. She was only about 6 or 7 years old before the first stirrings of World War I. My mom was 14 years old in junior high school. In 8th grade, the last time the Red Sox won the World Series. He's seen it twice. And she kept on scolding me right to the end of her life. Right to last summer, she kept bossing me around. It's like pineapple. I get it from both directions. He'd look at my necktie and she'd say, "You're going all the way to Chicago wearing that? Do me a favor," she'd say. "Go to a good store. Buy a new necktie. Charge it to me." At my age, she would say that, In the end, I couldn't bear the thought of losing her. I prayed right through the summer, you know, that my mom could live forever. But of course, deep down, I knew she can't. None of us can. We all know we're going to die and lose the ones we love the most to death. The old trees and the loveliness of children will outlive us all. My friends, life goes so fast. Use it well. God bless you. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kozol. In addition to this inspiring speech, all of you are invited to join Mr. Kozol in the lobby where he will be signing books. Malaprop's bookstore has made copies available for purchase, and I look forward to seeing you there where we may all admire, as his mother and Pineapple clearly would, the UNC Asheville colored Superior sneakers.